You know, since a certain UK Supreme Court ruling last month, we've seen more and more public announcements from institutions that actually want to comply with the law, and the genderists are losing their tiny minds over it. I'm going to start this video with a comment left by one of my favourite anonymous trolls, Arachnid Lupus. Hi, inbred sir. Starting a comment like that is a really good way to be taken seriously. Thoughts on Ansley Baker, a woman who was kicked out of the toilet because the male security guards thought she was a man, and those male guards went to a woman's space. Awfully silent, aren't you, sir? Your male silence speaks volumes on actual misogyny. What? I had to look up Ansley Baker and I found a news report from Boston, Massachusetts, USA, not Boston, Lincolnshire in England or Boston anywhere else. Here's a clip of that news report showing Ansley Baker and her girlfriend.
Ansley and her girlfriend Liz Victor were in a restroom at the Liberty Hotel in Boston when they say a male security guard came in and started banging on the stalls.
So Ansley is tall. Showing her next to her girlfriend really highlights this. She wears unisex clothes and her hair is very short. At a glance, yes, she can be mistaken for a man, especially if she's walking around obviously coupled up with a woman. But anyone who does at first glance mistake her for a man should be disabused of that notion the moment he gets close enough to speak to her and spots the female face, the fine features, the lack of facial stubble, and if it's not obvious from all that, it should be obvious the moment he hears her female voice.
One of the security guards was there telling me to get out of the bathroom, that I was a man in the women's bathroom. I said, I'm a woman.
This troll complained about my silence. I'm not sure why he expects me to have anything to say about some tiny, insignificant incident that happened in another country, but as he's clearly very challenged cerebrally, he would probably find it too taxing to explain. But then I came across one Daniel Lismore, who is apparently some sort of artist living here in London.
Living as art is how I became myself.
And who at least is brave enough to post the same kind of nonsense under his own name. On his Facebook page, which is open to the public, he posted a very long post exemplifying several of the same old canards that I've dealt with before, that many of us have been comprehensively taking down for years, but I'm guessing Lismore doesn't bother looking at the arguments that we actually make because he thinks he knows best. He says, TERFs gave men more power to abuse cis women in public. If that was your goal, congratulations, you nailed it. No, the other troll, whatever his name is, Arachnid Lupus, accused me of being silent on actual misogyny. He apparently needs a reminder of what the word misogyny means. It refers to hatred or contempt for women, which can manifest itself in various ways, but page 1 of the misogyny playbook says if men do anything horrible to women, it's the women's fault. Men don't have the power to do anything by themselves. Of course they don't. They depend on women to give them that power. In fact, judging by some of his public pronouncements and memes he's posted on social media, which I'm not going to share, Lismore wrote the latest edition of the misogyny playbook. The impression that he gives is that he really hates women, and it's galling to feel just how much he does. He's a very scary man. He goes on, let's talk about it. Okay, you said you were protecting women. What you've actually done is build an ideology where a man can challenge a woman in public and interrogate her about her body, not because she's trans, but because he decided she doesn't look woman enough, because you gave him permission. We did? How? He does give one example of this happening recently, a woman queuing for the ladies at Queen Elizabeth Hall, which is a big music venue on the South Bank. And he was a very obnoxious man. And the lady herself said she didn't mind the genuine mistake. It was the manner in which he carried it out. About 4 years ago, I made a video in my Awful Argument series called It's All Your Fault, dealing with the suggestion that when women who choose what is culturally considered to be a masculine presentation are mistaken for men at first glance, this is the fault of TERFs. The reasoning was never explained, but now Daniel Lismore helpfully tells us, you've become the bathroom bouncers of womanhood. If she doesn't look soft enough or submissive enough or feminine enough, you've decided it's fine for her to be stopped. You've made fear the price of entry. Okay, just to put this into some kind of perspective, these are some of the women that stand accused by Lismore. These women who've had to fight to hold on to the very meaning of the word lesbian as same-sex attracted woman against entitled narcissistic straight men who've tried to redefine the word for their own nefarious purpose. These are the women, Daniel Lismore, that you are accusing of saying women must look feminine, soft, submissive. Are you a bit thick? Yes, some women who reject femininity occasionally get mistaken for men. This has been happening at least since gender nonconformity in appearance became normalised in, the late 20th century, if not before, and it has nothing to do with our fight to hold on to our sex-based rights and protections. Here's our friend Anne Razilo speaking at the very first Women's Place UK meeting back in 2017.
And having been a gender non-conforming woman all my life, sisters, and yes, and like Linda, I've been misgendered many times. I've been called sir, it happens on a fairly regular basis. That's just one of those things because, I've tried to break down barriers and boxes and titles and names, all my adult life.
Is she bothered? In the past few weeks, there have been countless similar accounts posted on Twittex. It happens sometimes, and the cultists have always tried to make a much bigger issue out of it than the women it's actually happened to. Listen, if there is any real increased incidence of this happening, and if this has anything to do with the current climate around transgenderism, it's because people are waking up to the fact that men have been getting into women's spaces, and because some such men have been publicly stating that they are going to continue doing so. They're going to defy the law. Any hostile climate around transgenderism is a climate created by them, not by us, who, talking of giving permission to people, we never gave permission for men to ignore our boundaries in the first place. Give your head a wobble, Lismore, and every other muppet who thinks the same. Now, back in 2019, Kathleen Stock and a bunch of other feminist academics published an article on Medium called Doing Better in Arguments About Sex, Gender and Trans Rights, in which they address some of the falsehoods and fallacious arguments, including the utterly ridiculous one about having to check people's genitals to know what sex they are, as if that's the only way anyone can know for sure. Now, in this article, they do concede that it can happen occasionally that a woman is mistaken for a man, and even the other way round, but more rarely. Quote, given the occasional fallibility of our capacity to sex others, meaning to identify the sex of others, Arguing for same-sex spaces for females, such as bathrooms, etc., means that sometimes females in those spaces will be missexed, mistaken for men, in other words, and sometimes males in those spaces will not be perceived as males. We see the former as a regrettable cost that has to be balanced against and is nonetheless smaller than the greater harms to females should women-only space effectively become unisex via a policy of gender self-ID. We see the latter as something that no open society can do anything about and which it would be illiberal to try to prevent. That is the argument they are not addressing, these trans activists. There are two possibilities. Neither is perfect. Both have risks. But which is worse? Little girls being violated by grown men in women-only spaces, or grown women being mistaken for men in those same spaces? What say you, Daniel Lismore? Oh, by the way, not only do the genderists not address this argument, but ever since on social media, they've been lying about how it was presented. Even up to last month, they were posting that Kathleen Stock had once called this thing collateral damage, just collateral damage. But where's the damage? At worst, a woman feels embarrassed, upset, angry for a little while. If that's collateral damage, what do you call what happened to Katie Dolotovsky's victims? Now, onto the Supreme Court ruling of 16th April, which clarified that under our Equality Act 2010, woman means female, man means male. A reasonable point is raised by those who say that trans-identifying women who pass as men are now expected to be coming into female spaces where they don't want to be and alarming us because of their appearance. Unfortunately, they don't always make that point in a reasonable way. This daft comment appeared under one of my old videos recently. Okay, but do you want a buff man with a full beard and a penis going into the female restroom? Note the word trans does not appear in this question, and the poster was surprised that I was rude to him for asking such a bloody stupid question. It transpired in the subsequent exchange that we had that he wasn't even talking about men. He was talking about women who pass as men. I presume he knows they only have pretend penises. They don't actually grow fully functioning penises through being on testosterone. But it was no less annoying because I had discussed that very question in the video he was commenting beneath in my Awful Arguments by Trans Activists series, in which I said this. But obviously in cases where an unknown woman's appearance has been so drastically altered that she genuinely passes for a man, as in this case, and Hughes is 6 foot tall as well, by the way, we won't know that she's a woman, and her presence in a women-only space will probably upset other women. Let her go to the men's room if that's what she wants. I guarantee she's not going to be interested in spying on men because she's a woman. 4 years later, although I think everything I said in that clip holds true, I do regret that I completely disregarded the possibility that male users of public toilets might not want a woman going in there. That was a generalization I shouldn't have made, but to be fair, it was based on a lifetime of seeing men unashamedly pissing all over the place in public, even ones in dresses. So now, trans-identifying women who pass as men but who don't want to break the law, and in the absence of a mixed-sex facility they can use, need to come into female spaces, and if anyone challenges them, they should just calmly confess that they are female, that it is not their choice to be there, but that is the law. I understand it will be difficult, but it's not impossible. And this brings me onto that bit of the Supreme Court judgment contained in paragraph 221 about public services. There seems to be quite a bit of confusion over this paragraph, which provides that a woman who has the protected characteristic of gender reassignment, in other words, she calls herself a trans man and has changed her appearance so she looks like a man, could also be excluded from a female-only service. Quote, "This might be considered proportionate where reasonable objection is taken to their presence, for example, because the gender reassignment process has given them a masculine appearance or attributes to which reasonable objection might be taken in the context of the women-only service being provided." And that would not flout the law. It would not be discrimination because of gender reassignment. I don't know how many times I've reread this paragraph and looked at online discussions about it. I've seen lawyers claim one interpretation only to be corrected by other lawyers. The first thing that needs to be said is that although they only specify trans-identifying women in this ruling, the interim guidance on the ruling states, "In some circumstances, the law also allows trans women, i.e. biological men, not to be permitted to use the men's facilities, and trans men, that is biological women, not to be permitted to use the women's facilities." So the exclusion applies to trans-identifying people of both sexes, provided there is a legitimate reason. Women who've been on testosterone for a long time, like Buck Angel here, pass as men, and they will alarm some women who don't know them if they enter certain women's spaces. But the law does not allow them to use men's spaces. That is absolutely clear, that single sex means single sex, no exceptions. If they make exceptions, it stops being a single sex service and becomes mixed sex. So there is a potential problem there. As the EHRC interim guidance says, they can't be put in a position where there are no facilities for them to use. And it states that where possible, mixed sex toilet, washing or changing facilities in addition to sufficient single sex facilities should be provided. Well, I've noticed that lots of places in London, the big museums, for example, some restaurants, already provide a third gender-neutral toilet in addition to single-sex ones. What I think will happen in reality is that people who are confident that they genuinely pass, and sometimes they're overconfident, but I do think that some of them will carry on as before. They'll be taking a risk, of course, but I honestly see lots of trans-identifying women getting away with it because I assume that people popping into a public toilet are like me and don't spend any time examining the appearance of other users. Men trying to present as women often stand out like a sore thumb. Just their height is often enough to make you look twice. It's like an involuntary reaction. But then you notice the other signs. But if a short bearded man goes into the gents and makes straight for a cubicle, I assume other users of that space won't bat an eyelid, and even if you object in principle, as long as she's discreet, how much would you actually care in practice? Now, to turn to the dumbest argument ever. So dumb, it didn't even deserve a place in my awful argument series. Here are a few manifestations of it left on my channel and elsewhere. Lismore said it too. I won't bother showing his version. The top one here says, "You have overplayed your hand." By you, he presumably doesn't mean me personally, but the 4 Women Scotland group and all of us who support and are grateful for what they did in seeking clarification of a law that was hurting us. That's overplaying our hand. We should have just carried on letting it hurt us. So many people know or are connected to trans people. So what? Go tell the people who are saying that trans-identifying people are such a tiny minority, they're not causing any problems. trans people aren't going to stop using their preferred facilities. Yeah, I've no doubt many will try to defy the law. The difference is that now we are on firm ground in challenging them. Why would you see that as a bad thing? The only thing you have done is you have opened the door to cis men using the women's by claiming to be trans. This is the only thing we have done, is it? Well done, you have endangered women. Well, thank you for recognising the dangers of men getting into our spaces. I am so touched by this sudden concern for real women that so many of them have suddenly dug up from somewhere deep in their heart, but that has been notably lacking for all the years we've been fighting to hold on to our single-sex spaces, and it really doesn't cut it now. Perhaps if you could just explain what is the difference between men who claim to be women, or straight men who claim to be women, and straight men who don't. Oh, wait, I'll just read one more. I will stand up for women in women's bathrooms being assaulted by state-sanctioned men. What the hell is a state-sanctioned man? Just in case one of those women is secretly a man in disguise and is planning on assaulting someone. I'm sorry, lady, but you are a moron. Moi? I'm the moron here? You are actively endangering all women. Okay, I can see that these people are speaking from a place of great pain on behalf of all those creepy, entitled men who are now going to have to keep out of spaces where they shouldn't have ventured into in the first place. And that's why they are forgetting to engage their brains before lashing out. But this scenario of men charging into women's toilets, I mean, presumably in this fantasy, these men will be challenged by any woman who happens to be in that space at the time, and they will say, no, you're all right, I'm transgender, I'm entitled to be here, and then they will assault one of the women there and they will get away with it. This is bonkers. Think about it. I know I've said before that assaults in single-sex spaces are extremely rare. Most public toilets are in places where lots of people are. Department stores, shopping malls, railway stations, airports, theatres, nightclubs. Much as pervy, predatory men might love the idea of entering them and spying on or molesting a female user of that space, they hardly ever try it because they realise the high risk of getting caught. Pervs who follow women into public conveniences in more isolated places don't need to pretend to be transgender. This is what they have been saying themselves for years. If a predatory man wants to enter a female space to molest a woman, he'll just do it. He doesn't need to transition. Mostly he won't, though, unless it's somewhere that doesn't have lots of other people milling around. So there's that. And there's also the fact that while women can be mistaken for men, especially if they have been on testosterone for a while and they've got facial hair, maybe balding, etc., very few men can be mistaken for women. And the notion that the average man with his greater height, his larger frame, hands, feet, is going to be just accepted as someone who used to be a woman. I mean, do you really think we're that stupid? Dawn Butler does.
If trans men then have to use women's toilets, that's going to make women less safe, because how are you going to stop a man, a normal man, going into a woman's toilets and saying, I'm a trans man?
But as she once famously said, that a child is born without a sex, I wouldn't set too much store by her opinion. What they are telling us is that we either have to put up with men who LARP as women in our spaces, or we will have to put up with men LARPing as women, LARPing as men in our spaces. What we can't have is our own women-only spaces. What they are telling us is that gender ideology, the normalization of transgenderism, makes women less safe, whichever way we look at it. But we already knew that, and that's why we need to keep fighting it. But thanks for making it so obvious. Who are the morons again? That's all.